If you don't know what an iceberg video is, then it's quite simple to explain. Just like a real iceberg, the video goes from the top, meaning the most visible part, to the bottom, the part nobody sees or knows about. This iceberg has around 40 entries, divided in 6 different layers, one more mysterious than the other. Last time we managed to cover the area about the iceberg, with the most known entries. Then we took a look at the top of the iceberg, finding out more about partially mysterious topics, and then we started to dive into the unknown, with Colchis and Lemuria. Today we'll continue from where we last left off. Remember to subscribe to the channel and comment under this video to help it spread to the algorithm and suggest you part 3, the final part of this iceberg, when it finally comes out. Now let's get to it. Prester John's Kingdom. This is a topic I recently discussed in the context of the second Ring Beyond the Ice Wall series I'm working on. There we saw how Prester John's successor state in the hypothetical continent of Azania might still go on to this day. But here I'll do my best to tell his story in history. The name of this legendary figure is first recorded in 1145, and his existence was still believed in up to the 17th century. When Africa fell to the caliphates in the early Middle Ages, it was thought that the land of the Monophysites and the Copts would be lost forever to Islam. And so the popular consciousness of the Europe of the time accepted the lands below the Holy Land as territories ruled by Muslim states. But one element rose up in the late Middle Ages that changed the perception of religion in the land of Kham. This was Prester John, a man both king and priest of a huge Christian empire in the distant lands, locked in a continuous war against Islam. Originally it was thought that the location of Prester John's empire was in Asia, but after 1441, when an ambassador representative of a hidden Christian African kingdom reached the Christian Council of Florence, the area of John's realm shifted to Africa, more specifically Abyssinia, identified as the land of origin of the free Magi that brought gifts to Jesus after his birth in the Bible. The Christian realms had always wished for an ally against the Islamic foes, and the story of Prester John was exactly what they needed to find hope of a Christian resurgence during the Crusades. In the Eastern Orthodox Church, the prophecy of Abyssinia rising up against the infidels and conquering the lands of origin of Muhammad was widespread across the patriarchs. Overall, the belief in Prester John's realm was almost universal, and when, during the Age of Discovery, the Portuguese would discover Ethiopia during their travels to the Indies, they would identify it as the kingdom of Prester John. Only during the 17th century would academics like German Orientalist Hiob Ludolf demonstrate that there was no real connection between Ethiopian kings and Prester John, ending the validity of this century-spanning legacy until now, when the idea was once again brought to light after many more researches. Mu. The sunken continent shares much with Atlantis, but its origin is way more recent. Its first appearance is in the works of Augustus Leponengion, that in 1864 mistranslated the Truano Codex, a Mayan work of literature describing Yucatan's history, with the Landa alphabet. He would find that the word Mu referring to a lost land, and he would identify it as Atlantis, claiming that the civilization of Egypt was started by Queen Mu, a refugee from the sunken continent of Mu, with other refugees fleeing towards Americas and becoming the Maya. The submerged continent was popularized by James Churchward, a British occult writer that placed it in the Pacific Ocean, from the Mariana Trench to the Easter Island, explaining the loss of the continent as a result of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Even more modern figures, such as Ataturk, founder of the modern state of Turkey, was interested in the concept of Mu, and identified it as a possible homeland for the Turks. Ogygia. Ogygia is the mysterious island described in Homer's Odyssey. During Odysseus' journey back to his motherland, the island of Ithaca, Odysseus stumbled upon Ogygia, where the nymph Calypsos detains him for 7 years and intends to marry him. Eventually, Odysseus is allowed to leave the island following the intervention of the gods. The island was described by many as being the furthest point west from Ulysses' starting location, so Greece. Some associate it with islands near the Straits of Gibraltar, others think it's the mythical Atlantis, while some modern figures, like Ruahidri of Laith Beharteg, believe it's in Ireland. Ogygia is also one of the topics that were mentioned inside the Beyond the Ice Wall series, in this case the original one, and it was inspiration to the island of Ogygia, which was called the Island of Doom there. The Garden of the Hesperides. Like many hidden lands in ancient Greek mythology, the Garden of the Hesperides makes no difference. The Hesperides were a group of nymphs of the evening, daughters of the Titan Atlas, the divine entity that held up the entire world upon his shoulders. They lived in a lush garden that featured some of the trees of golden apples, which were a wedding gift from the primordial Gaia to Zeus. A dragon called Ladon was said to be the protector of this garden, killing whoever tried to steal the golden apples. In more modern times, it was realized that these golden apples probably referred to oranges, a fruit widely unknown to Europe before the Middle Ages, which meant that the garden itself could have existed as some sort of sanctuary to the sacred oranges of Atlas. Some of the proposed locations of the famous garden were Portugal and southern Spain, both areas that grew oranges before the rest of Europe. Sheba. Also known as Saba, this kingdom was well known to all of Christendom and to the Jews, due to its presence in various passages of the Bible. In the Holy Book, the Queen of Sheba would have visited the legendary King Solomon. Even in the New Testament, Sheba is mentioned in the book of Matthew and Luke. Ethiopian sources place the location of the kingdom in the eastern regions of Ethiopia. This is in contrast to the placement of Sheba as a kingdom between modern-day Yemen and Djibouti, as it grew rich through the trade along the incense route. Even sources in the Quran tell of a lavishly rich Sheba, in control of all the spices and the fertile plains of the Arabian Peninsula, the part called Arabia Felix. The presence of Sabaeans, the name of the people of the kingdom of Sheba, is also well attested historically, as their writing script was so popular it still influences some of the languages spoken today in Ethiopia and Eritrea, such as Amharic and Tigrinya. Thule. Known in medieval and classic literature as Ultima Thule, meaning the furthermost Thule, it was considered the northernmost border of the world, out of which only oceans and the void existed, as a sort of natural barrier of Earth. For the longest time, this landmass continued to be largely hypothetical, with the only certainty being that it was in the north of Europe or Asia. But when the Vikings brought the knowledge of Iceland and Greenland's existence to the rest of Europe, many cartographers started calling them Thule. In ancient times, it was said to be a land where the sun went to rest, with eternal night, and whose territories were neither completely solid nor liquid, but of the density of a jellyfish. If we followed the ancient descriptions of calculations of the coordinates of Thule, we could reach the island of Soma in Norway, and the 2010 research in the Technical University of Berlin proved this. So, is it possible that the ancient Greeks could reach northern Norway through an expedition starting from the city of Massalia? We can't know for sure, but it sure suscitated an interest in the Germans during World War II that considered Thule as one of the possible homelands of the Aryan race. Chimeria. Chimeria is the name given to the area inhabited to the barely known Sumerian people. These nomad warriors were a scourge on ancient Europe and Asia, bringing horse-led warfare wherever they went. Though their existence is only certified by ancient Greek and Assyrian sources, as well as Roman ones, the latest being in 500 BC, this population was feared enough to be considered almost unstoppable warriors. They originated from the lands we now call southern Russia and Ukraine, though interestingly enough, their legacy lives on in another area they often came to, Crimea, whose name comes from the Sumerians themselves. Their historical presence in said area was bound to end by the hands of the Scythians, another Indo-European nomad population of the Old World, which would cause them to scatter into Anatolia, the Balkans, and southern Italy. In southern Italy, specifically in Campania, they would create an underground society connected with tunnels and caves, whose most holy figure was the oracle, who could apparently predict death and the future as a whole. This figure would later become a big part of Roman pagan religion, though its origins are possibly Sumerian, as its name, Cibola Cumana, could trace itself from Sibyl Cimeria, or Sibyl Chimera. Furthermore, the people above the underground settlements of the Sumerians would create legends about these old civilizations, and between the many, one was that they were actually giants, the same giants that apparently built Naples. Norumbega. In their travels to North America during the early 16th century, the Verrazzano brothers would end up calling a region in the north of the continent Norumbega. Then Jacques Cartier, on Verrazzani's footsteps, would identify modern-day Narragansett River and Cape Cod as the Norumbeg River and Norumbeg Cod respectively, adding in between a supposed settlement called the City of Norumbega. Furthermore, reinforcements of the idea of a city of Norumbega, like the ones made by David Ingram, describing the city as full of women in gold and silver, would make the location highly researched between explorers. Despite many expeditions, nobody would ever find Norumbega to this day. Just as with the island of California or the Prester John's Kingdom, I made a separate video dedicated to this topic, and I recommend you check it out. Tartaria. From the Urals to the Pacific Ocean, what to call a land so big yet so empty and barren? Tartaria is the collective name of the European and Middle Eastern civilizations that observed massive world-changing empires forming from unknown lands in Central Asia and modern-day Siberia and Mongolia, creating a monolith from this idea of a united steppe realm, usually an empire too. We saw in a specifically dedicated video how there are multiple theories around this Tartaria, with some thinking it was just a name for unknown geographical regions, others thinking it was a unified empire that ruled this vast stretch of land all the way into the age of exploration, and finally, others thinking that it was a super advanced civilization whose end was brought by mudfloods. In history, proof of Tartaria can be attributed by different events, like the rise of the Mongol Empire. The idea of a united Tartary became a reality with it. Along with many more territories, Genghis' empire became the biggest the world had ever seen, therefore one of the most advanced. Even up to the 19th century, the term Tartaria was still used by Europeans, as well as the name Tartary, with Siberia being known as the Great Tartary and Manchuria being known as the Chinese Tartary. Despite all of this, modern-day historians and the consensus says that there was no other things in Tartaria except for tribes and some relatively small realms, though all of this is still shrouded in a lot of mystery. Cathay. The name Cathay is thought to be originated from a Latinized translation of the word of the semi-nomadic people of medieval Inner Mongolia, the Khitan. The fantastical land of Cathay was first introduced to medieval Europe when merchants that traveled from East Asia to Europe brought the news of this land they came from, the most famous of these merchants being Marco Polo, a Venetian merchant that in the early 14th century spread the knowledge of his journey and experiences in the Mongol-controlled northern China, Yuan, with his book, The Million, greatly fascinating the European society of the time, that got intrigued with the concept of a highly developed and exotic land in the East, where rare goods, such as silk and porcelain, were abundant. During the age of exploration, many Europeans wanted to find Cathay, but until the 16th century, or even the late 16th century, despite arriving to China many times, they did not associate it with the Cathay of Marco Polo's book, due to the poorer state that the Eastern realm was in at the time. Maida. A territory medieval in origin, the island of Maida was definitely one of the longest enduring hypothesized lands in all of cartography's history. It was said to be in the shape of a crescent, situated in the west of Brittany and in the south of Ireland, and had changed names many times throughout history, with the first names being Brazier and Onzelle, and the final names being Asmaidas and, of course, Maida. What's interesting is how much people were convinced of its existence, to a point where doubting it was considered ignorance, and this made it so that the island persisted in maps all through the centuries between the 12th and the 17th centuries. For this reason, in the modern age, ships like the American scientists were sent to research the area to find out how this phantom island could deceive the old continent for so long. And fastly enough, the truth was found. Maida existed, or at least it once did. The deepness of the sea level indicated that not too far back in time, before a harsh earthquake engulfed the island into the depth of the ocean, there used to be a 45-kilometer sized landmass above the water. Meroe. For long it was considered a legend. The city of Meroe was said to be the land where Moses led an Egyptian military expedition into, and whose princesses he married as a part of the peace treaty with Meroe's king. The city was everywhere in ancient sources, but after the Muslim conquest of the Nile, it became lost to time to everyone but the locals, similarly to the kingdom of Prester John. In colonial times, following the campaign led by Napoleon in Egypt, the city became a center of interest for Europeans such as Karl Richard Lepsius, that managed to identify the beautiful ruins of the city as those that once were the capital of the Kushite Empire. With Egyptology becoming popular in the 19th and 20th centuries, the studies of Meroe continued, recovering much of its forgotten history as one of the longest inhabited cities of Nubia. Cipango. Much like with Cathay, the name Cipango or Cipango seems to be a Latinized version of how the Chinese called Japan at the times of Marco Polo, that being Rebanguo. Cipango or Cipango, once again, was described by Polo as an independent island inhabited by light-skinned, civilized, good-looking people, where gold was so common that the entire roof of the royal palace was covered in it. He points to the island being part of a far larger archipelago, but he mentions that the island of Cipango is far larger than its neighbors. This knowledge brought by Marco Polo to Europe through the book of his travels would create deep roots in the minds of European explorers, to the point where Columbus himself, upon his arrival to the New World, believed to have landed on the shores of Cipango. Eventually, Cipango would have evolved into the modern word we still use to call Japan. This can be noted even more in the Latin languages or the Romance-induced ones, like in Italian, where Cipango and Japan, which is called Giappone, are very similar. Cibola. When Friar Marcos de Niza, a Franciscan priest, reported to Spanish officials that he had seen the fabulous city of Cibola in modern-day New Mexico, it prompted a series of expeditions to find the Golden City of North America. The lands of Cibola were said to be super-developed settlements where gold was easier to find than water, and whose 7 golden cities could bring an entire kingdom to wealth beyond belief. But the expeditions to find Cibola were a disaster. The first discovered the Zuni Native Americans and some modest settlements by the Pueblo, with the entire expedition party basically returning empty-handed and in debt. Furthermore, expeditions did not find much more success, and then after a century or two from de Niza's announcement, hope to find Cibola was lost. Despite all of this, some claim that Cibola still exists to this day, and has been hidden by the government of the United States because of its being the main source of US gold. And that concludes this layer of the mysterious and forgotten lands iceberg. We are one step closer to knowing the ultimate truths hidden in the last few tiers. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, remember to support the channel by liking it and subscribing to the channel, and most of all, leaving a comment in the description. Thank you for watching, see each other in the next part, goodbye.